I wanted to tell you just a little bit about myself and my role to put into context what I will be talking about today. So I work for Nokia. Raise your hand if you had a Nokia phone at some point. Almost the whole room. Snake, the classic, yes. So Nokia is no longer in the mobile phone business. We are not a consumer brand anymore. We are entirely B2B. So everything I'll be talking about today is in the context of B2B. And we're still in telecom. We sell telecom networks to the likes of, T-Mobile, Verizon, also for things like data center networks, the broadband that comes into your home, undersea cables, networks in ports and hospitals and mines and that kind of thing. So it's all about that. And I am the Chief Marketing Officer of one of Nokia's 3 business groups. It's called Cloud and Network Services. And it's really about the software that makes our networks work well. So it's, automation, security, AI, analytics, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So our topic today, as you heard, is Think Like a Strategist. The best CMOs don't wait for growth, they build it. So I wanted to start with a poll. I think we have a Slido option, Elena, to pull up and scan. But I'm interested in, for everyone here in the room, how your counterparts in the C-suite perceive the role of marketing in driving growth. Is it that you are a strategic growth partner? Is it more that you support growth activation? Or is it that you are the creative in events support? So, the first one is obviously the strategic growth partner is the most strategic. It's a struggle for a lot of people in marketing to ensure that they are seen as a strategic growth partner and aren't just the distributors of the cool merch. So let's give it another moment and get a few more responses. Good. Still coming in a little bit, but this is actually really positive that we're at 55% of you feel that your counterparts in the C-suite perceive your role as driving growth. So you're not just seen as a cost center or a tactical sort of execution arm, but you have a real seat at the table, which is great. I'm wondering whether people who take the time to come to a CMO summit and are very proactive about, looking at their discipline, their career, are maybe not totally representative and are, at a higher point on the maturity curve. Let's hope so. So, okay, thank you all for responding. I think that's really interesting outcomes. So, unlike what we just saw, it is very often the case when you look at sort of industry-wide data that CMOs do not necessarily have a seat at the table, or even if you do have a seat at a table, reporting to a president or a general manager where your peers are the other C-level leaders of your business. Very often, marketing is not seen as a growth driver, as an equal participant in forming the strategy of the business, unfortunately. So some statistics from Gartner, only 14% of CMOs play a direct role in enterprise growth strategy. Just over half succeed in proving business value. Just under half feel that their function is viewed more as a cost center or as an expense as opposed to a growth driver. And 40% of Fortune 500 companies do not have a growth role on the CEO's executive committee. I was chatting with a woman in back who is the growth officer for her company. It was really interesting seeing how marketing plays a key role in that. But the other survey data here shows that it's the CFOs and the CEOs that tend to have the highest degree of skepticism of marketing's value, people who are really looking at where's the revenue coming from, where are the costs. So that's where we really need to move the needle and improve not just the perception, but the reality of what marketing is contributing to the business. So this is what seems to happen all the time. You've got the CMO who is very enthusiastic about what she's doing. She's saying, our new campaign was extremely successful. We generated 12 million impressions, 10,000 engagements, whatever the metrics are. And the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO is saying, I don't see this translating to anything. Where's the pipeline? Where's the revenue growth? And how much did you spend on this fancy campaign? So this is what happens frequently is that there's a miss between what we as marketers are reporting to our C-suite colleagues and what they want to hear from us to really understand our value as a function. So one more poll. Thinking about how you report your activity and your impact to your bosses. Do you report mainly on what you would consider to be growth KPIs? Your impact on revenue, your impact on customer lifetime value, the cost of acquiring a customer, the cost of expanding an existing customer? Or is it more performance-based, leads, conversions, that kind of thing? Or is it activity-based, like the examples I said a moment ago? We had this many clicks, this much of an open rate on our email campaign, impressions, reach, etc. So let's give that a moment. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some correlation between this and the previous poll where people who really are strategic, have a place at the table, are viewed that way by their peers, are more likely to be reporting growth-oriented KPIs. So yeah, similar proportions to the last poll. So good. Thank you all for doing the polls. I think it's a really great way for everyone in the room to see where others are and sort of unofficially benchmark yourself a bit. So I would like to talk a little bit about how do we get from the point where things are lost in translation, where we are not seen as contributing to growth, not seen as strategically, to more of the nirvana of marketing value. And there's 3 aspects that I'd like to touch on. The first is measuring performance tied to business value. So what we talked about in the poll a moment ago, what are some ideas on how to do that more effectively? The second is about bringing valuable customer insights to business stakeholders. So in marketing, we have access usually to data, to analytics, to a digital footprint that is unparalleled in the C-suite. And how are we using that to advance the perspectives of the C-suite on our customers? And then last but not least is about how we as CMOs and leaders of marketing organizations can look at upskilling our teams so that we have everyone thinking more strategically. And I think those 3 together really will yield a different outcome and value for us. So I won't go through this in excruciating detail. This is something that someone on my team, who I'm sort of mentoring to think more like a strategist, came up with when he was thinking about our interaction with our CEO or president of our business group, our CFO, what we were measuring and what we should be measuring or moving towards. So the things that, in our assessment are the most important to a CEO, I report to the president of a business group, is the pipeline growth and the annual recurring revenue. They are very concerned about, the top line, the growth of the top line. Of course, the more recurring the revenue, the more valuable it is. Many other things as well, but how do we frame things in terms of our contribution to revenue growth, especially recurring revenue? And CFOs tend to be more concerned about the return on marketing investment. I remember when I started at my current job, I've been at Nokia for about 3.5 years. That was my first conversation with the CFO. If I give you $1, how much do I get back? And I would like to understand how that's happening. So that's very important to CFOs who are making, investment decisions across many different things. And then, related to that are the costs that are associated with marketing, cost of acquiring a customer, expanding a customer. So, we're sort of trying to map the things that we would traditionally measure against what is most important to some of these key and sometimes most skeptical stakeholders. This, I know you can't see, doesn't matter. It's more just the point of it. One thing that we have been doing, the chart on the left indicates this in terms of return on marketing investment, is for specific campaigns, even over the course, this is a 3-year measurement. We're measuring, of course, how much we spend on the campaign. And then we're measuring how much we get out at the other end in terms of order intake. And then we are comparing that to Gartner benchmarks. So in this case, these are our actual trend lines. For one of the campaigns that we were running, we got much more optimized over the course of the couple years that we have been running this. And we're at the point now that if we put $1, or we're a Finnish-based company, so €1 in, we are getting 12.2 euros out at the other end in order intake because we've done a lot of work to really optimize these campaigns around the target personas, the content, and so forth. The Gartner benchmark is you put in $1 and you get $5 out at the other end. So we can show this kind of thing to our stakeholders and say, we're better than double the industry benchmark for comparable companies, B2B technology industry of a certain size. That's super impactful, to a CFO in terms of the return on marketing investment. Another set of data that we're bringing for a different purpose is insights about what our customers care about. And I'll talk about a couple examples of this. The chart on the right is something that it's a tool we use to measure the topics that our customers are really engaging in. So this specific example was taken from, our biggest event of the year. It's an industry event in the telecom industry, 100,000 people go. Every year. And we wanted to track, we're in lots of meetings with customers. We know what they're saying to us directly, but what are they searching for on social media? What are the headlines that are getting the most clicks across the board? From many different sources, what are the hot topics during the course of this event and how do they relate to each other? What's the relationship between people's interest in AI and energy efficiency? Can you run a telecom network more efficiently? Less power by using AI. So we are kind of crawling all of these using, MarTech tools, crawling all of these data sources, and then I can go back to my colleagues on the leadership team and say, this is a big trending topic now. We need to make sure that this is in our materials that we're discussing with our customers. We'll put it on our website, but this is good for sales to know. This is good for the product teams to know. As you're building a roadmap, there's huge interest in these certain topics, maybe prioritize features that have to do with certain topics. So I think this is a really important way for marketing to increase, the strategic value by providing this data. In our world at Nokia, it's very B2B. It's very sales-driven. It's a huge commitment for T-Mobile to buy a 5G network. So it's very deep relationships between the sales teams, and that is super important. But they don't have the same digitally based data that we have. And so those together can really help triangulate on what is on customers' minds. Something that we started doing last year that has been really impactful also is, again, using a marketing tool. When we win a deal of a certain size, very large, tens of millions of dollars, we use a customer journey analytics tool where we go back, we congratulate sales, great job. We're not saying we won this instead of you, but here are all the touch points. So this is a real example of a deal we won that was significant. And, whatever it is, it's this customer on the topic of security and networks, the software we sell for cybersecurity. What are all of the things in the previous 18 months that they engaged with from a marketing perspective? They downloaded a white paper on this topic. They attended an event. They watched a demo. They attended a webinar. And that helps us really show the many touch points along these very long sales cycles that impact or at least influence the customer's purchase of our products. So this has been also really impactful, showing this to sales and making sure also that we're looking at, are there certain activities that we do on a regular basis that show up on these charts more than others? When there's a big win, there are many things that affect it, obviously, but are we seeing that this webinar series is particularly likely to come up on these reports? And so that also helps us more internally optimize our tactics and our approaches based on what seems to be, associated with big wins. So we chart these, we produce them every time there's a win of a certain size. And where we are starting to go with this, although we're in the early days, is into more AI enrichment. So, I mentioned trying to find, are there things that happen a lot that contribute to these wins? That is a great thing for AI to look at. What are the patterns here? Feed in multiple of these and sort of start detecting. Now, we all know that correlation does not imply causation. It could be coincidence in some of these cases, but you can start using AI to see the patterns and see what's most impactful when you look at these major, long-term wins that we have. And we're also, starting to use AI to distinguish some of the deeper relationships with the brand, with campaign strength, with marketing conditions. So it's primarily to show our impact on revenue, but has a lot of side benefits for us in terms of optimizing how we do marketing. I have a really great team. So as I mentioned, I'm CMO of one of the business groups, and one of the teams that I have in marketing does data and insights and analytics. And I can't tell you in the 3.5 years I've been there how much that has grown in importance, especially with AI. But so much of what we're talking about here in terms of showing your value depends very much on having very good data and very good analytics. So if you're in a position where you have resources to put on that kind of thing, I would put them there and use AI for some of your other tasks. In my case, I have product marketing, I have campaign management, I have field marketing, press releases, all the digital channels. So it's a nice mix of activities, but I find that I'm putting more and more resources into this kind of data and analytics because it pays off. It's what gets us more of a seat at the table. I think marketing budgets are less likely to be cut if you can show your contribution to growth. And so I think there too, the return on investment, whatever you put into data and analytics is very likely to pay for itself over time. Also on the topic of getting insights about customers, something that we have started doing is using intent signals. So we'll work with the sales team on a certain, campaign. Here's the target account list that they want us to go after, the types of personas. We look at it by geography. And then we start looking at what are we seeing in terms of customers along the buying journey. If we have certain content that they are engaging with, web searches, that kind of thing, we're starting to pull all of that data together. And then we can help salespeople understand where customers are in the buying journey and then prioritize where they engage. So if someone's quite early and they're just engaging with, solution or like sort of education-oriented content, that's a great time for marketing to play the lead role. But as people progress through the buying journey and are getting closer to let's read a data sheet, let's get a little more detailed about the products here, that's when more of a successful handoff can take place between marketing and sales. So once we get priority accounts, we can now segment them and say, okay, these are actual numbers in our case on a certain campaign. We have 2,647 customers or accounts who are engaged somewhere in this process. At the awareness stage, at the beginning, when they're just starting to learn about it, that's 888 who are, very much consuming that kind of content. And then down the line, of course, the funnel narrows. So then we can go to sales with much more specific information. So that is a way that we are building some value. And then again, these are a real example of something that my team did this year. We did a content syndication campaign on a certain campaign topic. We did it in North America. With content syndication, we were mainly looking to get leads because we were entering some new verticals, some new markets. So that was the primary reason that we were doing it. But we really used a lot of the data that came back from that about who was engaging with the content to help us refine not just the marketing, but even the roadmap, worked closely with product management on that. So of course, there are many different types of signals, but if you put out an asset on, content syndication, an ebook or a white paper or whatever it is about a product that you have, then you can learn who's actually looking at this. And in our case, this particular area of our business, financial services, people were very interested in it. It has to do with, fraud prevention and security and that kind of thing. And then like retail and e-commerce, not so interested. So you have to do this enough to get representative samples and that kind of thing. But we have used data like that, again, coming from marketing and marketing campaigns, to bring back to our business colleagues, and it's sales information, it's targeting information, but it's also product roadmap information in terms of the features. Yep, question?
Yes, so when you talk about prospects coming to a general website that you have to collect this information or ask for the information?
In this case, it was content syndication where we pay a third party. There's many of them, but I don't want to advocate any particular, but there's many vendors who do content syndication where we provide the content. These are the types of people we would like to see this content. And then they guarantee a certain number of leads, downloads, that kind of thing. And then they use data about what people are searching on, or they read certain publications or whatever it is, to put the content that we're providing in front of the people who we are trying to reach. And then, if they download it, whatever it is, then they come back to us with a lead, that we're authorized to follow up on. So this is a specific, content syndication tactic as opposed to on our own website. There, of course, it depends on how good your website technology is, but there's lots of information you can get that way. This is more, this is who we're trying to reach. Is it reaching the people we want? And of course, like anything, you have to analyze it carefully. Did the content syndication vendor understand what we were asking for? Is what they produced a reflection of who's interested, or is this the direction that we pushed them in? But I think most good vendors now have much more sophisticated analytics that we of course always ask about. But this is really interesting data. If you've got some product that is not specific to a particular industry, can apply to multiple industries, and it turns out that a lot of people, like there's a pain point there that you might not have fully realized. It's again good data to have marketing bring back to the business. Okay, so as CMOs, one of our important responsibilities is leading an organization of marketers. In my case, and probably in many of yours, certainly if you work in a technical area like I do, I have a mixture of people who have spent their whole careers as engineers. I have people with PhDs in physics, deeply technical. They understand the products. They're very good product marketers. I have people who are right out of college, who are, it's their first job, or they're an intern. They're super creative. They're great at visualization. They're great at social media, and many different skill sets in between. And I think something that is really exciting for all of us is to challenge our teams. It's not just about us thinking strategically. It's about how do we create a whole organization that is thinking this way. So lots of thoughts on how you can do that. One thing that I do quite a lot is I have people who are individual contributors do presentations to my direct reports, to our leadership team on certain topics. And we coach them in advance on how to be strategic. Think about who your audience is. What does a CMO want to know versus your immediate boss? Again, what are the metrics that will matter there? So we try and do a lot of opportunities like that to coach people and put them in situations where they need to present some strategic thinking. I think also, in conversations with my direct reports, my leadership team, we do have, brainstorming sessions, workshops, thinking about, where is our company's growth going to come from, and how do we in marketing accelerate that? How do we get ahead of that? On the other hand, where are competitors maybe becoming more prominent, thinking defensively as well from a strategic perspective? Are there areas that we have a competitive advantage that may be disappearing? How do we take advantage of that as long as we can, in our marketing as well as, in how we present our products? AI is something, of course, we talk about a lot. How do we use AI tactically as well as strategically? So I think it's really interesting and important to kind of foster that thinking in our organization, because it makes it, I think, overall a much more high-performing organization when you're doing things consistently to get your team upskilled and becoming more strategic. Yep. I do a lot virtually. So Nokia, as I mentioned, is based in Finland. I'm here. I have 70 people in 15 different countries, like spanning the whole world, really, in part because I have field marketing, and so field marketing is really all over the place. So it's almost all virtual. Like my direct reports, we get together once a year for like 3 days, and that's when we do a lot of this kind of thing. But otherwise, we spend a lot of time on Microsoft Teams. Mm-hmm. Yes, so it's possible.
Is the upfront objective that's communicated to your team that the purpose is I'm going to give you live feedback so that this is a learning opportunity, or is it just like you should be presenting on, this campaign findings would be so long?
So I very much try to create a culture that is about learning. It's about experimenting. We do every quarter, we do a marketing review where people sign up to present to the whole organization something that they tried, that they learned something from. And I do this myself. I tried this, didn't work the way I thought. We're not going to do it again. We're going to pivot. We're going to do something different. So I think that's an excellent question. You have to really welcome that culture of experimentation, learning. I mean, there are times we place big bets on things, and then we have to decide what our criteria are. At what point do you double down? At what point do you stop? All of that. But I'm a big fan of doing, bolder things and encouraging people to think that way. And encouraging them to put themselves in my position too when they're pitching something. So one cool thing we've done in the past year is I reserved some of our overall budget as what we called an innovation budget. And I set up a Shark Tank program. And so the idea here was that individual contributors, so we have several layers in our organization, were the sharks with me. And we do this once a quarter. We haven't done fourth quarter yet, but 4 of them every time from different parts of the business would work directly with me as the sharks, and then leadership team members, so their bosses, would come up with an idea. Like, I want to do this new thing we've never done before. It'll cost $50,000. Here's what we expect to get out of it, impact, whatever. And then the sharks and I vote on which one to do, and then they have to come back and, how did their project perform. Some of them have been phenomenal successes, some of them have not, but the point is that we're open to this, and doing a program like that has been really helpful in getting individual contributors thinking more strategically, because many people want to become a line manager at some point. That very often means managing a budget and dealing with, resource constraints. And it's really easy if you've never done that to be like, I have these great ideas and nobody's giving me any money. But if you're in a situation where you're like, okay, let's think strategically about what are the overall objectives? What do we owe the business? Is this going to help or not? So long answer to your question, but okay. So how many times have you guys heard this phrase about AI? We're going to use AI to free up our team's time for more strategic work. That's what you always hear. So we are doing that so that we can do more strategic work. We have made a lot of progress in my organization over the past 2 years, where we've done many different use cases. I mean, again, here sometimes things work better than others, but we've created prompt libraries. We've tried to lay a lot of groundwork so that people can more easily use AI on their daily lives, more for productivity improvements at this point. So when we have done surveys and tried to measure the impact of this, we are finding that there has been a 40 to 50% time savings on most tasks that we've sort of prioritized for AI. So that's significant. And then, we're spending less money on agencies, for example, because we can do some of these image generations. Obviously, all the usual caveats apply. But I think if you want to be thinking more strategically yourself, if you want to get your teams thinking more strategically, you do have to clear off some of the more repetitive tasks so that people have the time and the bandwidth to do that. So this is a sort of classic maturity model that we borrowed from more of a technical side of things, but it's, what is the journey, the maturity model in terms of owning strategic growth, in terms of being seen as a strategist. And, we all are where we are on this journey, but when you're at the earlier stages, you're perceived more as just delivering an activity. Did you put on this event? Did it have cool merch? Did this, very task-based? And often in these situations, I have found that marketing is seen as almost like an assistant to sales, at least in a B2B situation. I want to do this event, can you get me there? That kind of thing. Then you move to more demand driving, where you have more funnel accountability, you're kind of moving up the maturity model. Then you get to the point where you're starting to orchestrate the customer journey. Like we were talking about before, where you can track where is the customer in this journey? How do we advance them? How do we accelerate where they are? How do we see what impact that stage eventually has on revenue? Then you get to guiding business strategy, bringing that intelligence to the table as part of the C-suite, and then finally owning the growth vision, where you're truly a growth leader. And when you get to that point, the magic really happens when CMOs are thinking like strategists. So the CMO is then saying to his or her peers at the CEO's table, here's how we've impacted things like customer lifetime value, influenced these major deals that generated X amount of revenue, and helped our C-suite better understand our customers. And the C-suite sees marketing as a real strategic partner. So,
like this video, we've got loads more on demand. To access all previous event recordings, become a member. When you join, you also get access to more resources, templates, and inspiration from other marketing leaders and CMOs. If you do want to catch us live, though, why not join us at our next event? Simply head to the link in the description to see where we're headed. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.